Hey, friends, welcome to episode 479 of the My 123 Cents podcast. I am Kevin Huntsberger, joined this week once again by Chad Smart. And Chad, we're going to be talking all about Hulkamania, which, as we're recording this, we are on the eve of as we're recording this, we're 2 days removed, but as the show drops, on the eve of Hulkamania officially. I know with the AWA, some would argue Hulkamania was already a thing, but really ramping off on that nationwide effort, January 23rd, 1984. I was watching at the time. We'll get more into that in just a minute, but I want to talk to you also about the Royal Rumble contest that we're doing and the 2024 Royal Rumble. Hard to believe now, 1989 till now, 35 plus years of Royal Rumbles, if you count the one that was on USA Network that first year. Are you excited for this year's Rumble? I love the Royal Rumble. It's probably, next to WrestleMania, my favorite event of the year.
I am. I think that, this Rumble has some unpredictability, which in, the last 10, 15 years really doesn't seem to be that often that we say like, oh, the winner could be one of a handful of people. Usually, you have like that one or two people are going to win, and due to the winner getting the title shot at WrestleMania, no one like a Heath Slater or I'm trying to think of who's actually on the off roster right now. Wow, my mind is going blank. But like, let's say the guys from Imperium that aren't Gunther, they don't have a shot normally at winning. And I think to WWE's detriment, like maybe they should have somebody like that win. And then, because you can always book, the stipulation where you lose the title match, or, they even do something where they call out the champion sooner and have the match and then put someone else in for WrestleMania. I think I like the title shot, the winner getting the title shot, because it makes the Rumble seem important. But I think it also may have ran its course by now, after 30 years of having that as the stipulation. Maybe come up with something different, and just so you can do something more spectacular booking or non-predictable booking.
Well, everyone has a theory. Everyone thinks, Cody's going to win, or Punk's going to win, or even The Rock is going to win. Do you want to go out on a limb and pick a winner at this point, or what are you, because I do think Elimination Chamber always kind of has that potential to shake things up as well. And especially with it being in Australia this year, I've heard rumblings that because it's an international PLE, that, they may want to do things to kind of shake things up once again. So I really don't have a winner in mind for it. I just am going to enjoy the show and see what happens. But any picks or thoughts of who might win?
And this is a problem with, I guess, having internet wrestling sites, news sites, as it is with a Z. Like I said, we're recording this the day before Monday Night Raw. Seth Rollins allegedly is injured. I don't know how severe that injury is. That could impact things going in. I think without that injury, I would have said, probably CM Punk wins, and then you lead to a CM Punk Seth Rollins match at WrestleMania. So the Punk one gets to win the Rumble and gets his WrestleMania moment, which is, one of the reasons why he walked out 10 years ago. I don't, me, we've discussed it on the show here. It's not that I don't like Cody. I just don't think the Cody story has really been built organically. I think it's more of a forced, like, oh, this is the story. This is the story. Here, let me tell you, I have to finish the story without really going into setting that story up. And so I don't think Cody, I don't think Cody needs the win. Everything looks like it's going to be Rock and Roman at WrestleMania, which I don't know about you. Personally, I am not interested in that match, because if Roman wins, then he's beaten a guy that hasn't wrestled in 11 years. If The Rock wins, then it just shows that, once again, the Attitude Era guys are better than your current roster.
Mm-hmm.
And something I was thinking about the other day, when Hogan came back, since we're going to be talking about Hogan, see, segue, tangent, tying it back in. When Hogan came back at WrestleMania 18 to face The Rock, he had been gone for 9 years from WWE.
Mm-hmm.
The Rock coming back now, which again, The Rock Roman, I mean, that match, I can understand why fans want to see it. And it is a generational match, not only just because of the family connections between Roman and Rock, but it is like the Attitude Era going on to the new era. But The Rock has not wrestled in 11 years since WrestleMania 29. And really, The Rock's last semi full-time match was WrestleMania 20. So you're looking at 20 years of a guy coming back. That in a sense, it's kind of like Bruno Sammartino coming back to face John Cena at, a previous WrestleMania before Bruno died, because he came back now. I think it'd be a little one-sided affair. But
well, I think The Rock looks great. So I think that that's part of the attraction, is that, you've got a guy who at 50 plus is still, at least looks to be in the shape to go. Now, whether he can actually carry on a 20 or 30-minute match, I doubt it. And
it shouldn't be a 20, 30-minute match, right, which is another problem with current wrestling, but that's another show.
Yeah. But I also agree with you. I don't necessarily want to see this match for the title. I don't mind it being for the, quote, head of the table role. But the tricky part is, how do you get the belt off of Roman between now and WrestleMania? And we're all speculating. I mean, we don't know. There hasn't been any, other than, excuse me, The Rock originally saying that on January 1st about wanting to be at the head of the table. He never mentions the belt. But has there been any mention, and I don't watch regularly enough to know, I don't know that there's been any other mentions since then. Now, obviously, the seeds are planted for WrestleMania. I think taking the belt off of Roman at the Rumble, maybe Randy Orton wins it and then faces Cody at WrestleMania. To me, that takes away from the story that they're telling with Cody. But is the story that he's got to beat Roman, or is the story that he wins the WWF or the WWE Championship that his father and brother never held? Yeah. So I agree with you on some of the respects of, the story not being completely clear, but I think it minimizes Cody's win if he goes on and beats LA Knight or Randy Orton or AJ Styles at WrestleMania versus beating Roman Reigns. Because Roman Reigns has been this monster for 4 years or whatever, however long, almost 4 years now. And then does he go on to beat Hulk Hogan's record as WWE champion? And you mentioned it earlier. There's that unpredictability. We don't know where they're thinking creatively, and then you throw in an injury like Seth Rollins has suffered, and does that take him out of WrestleMania, or do they kind of piece him together to make it between now and WrestleMania and have him, not wrestle and just come out and talk and then drop the belt to Punk at Mania? There's a lot of unknowns, and then just from this ability to tell the stories, but then you throw in the injury factor too, and that just completely changes the course for everybody. So,
yeah, and I think in some regards, I think a Cody Randy Orton match is a better story, just given the history of those two. Whereas, we've said it before on the episode we talked about WrestleMania last year, where Cody doesn't need to beat Roman to finish the story, for Cody's story, for Roman's story. And I still think that if and when Roman loses, it needs to be either, the way it's looking right now, I would say Solo Sikoa, or it needs to be one of the Usos, because that's the story of the bloodline. And if Roman just gets beat by someone else and then the bloodline just kind of dissolves, then to me, it's kind of like throwing away the last 2.5 years of the bloodline story.
Yeah. I didn't think about it from that perspective. That's an interesting point of view to have with it too. So,
or I just think that Shark Boy needs to make his WWE debut and beat Roman Reigns. And if I was booking, that's what I would do. And that's why I am not a booker.
I'm going to throw one more name out at you, because I know you're not on TikTok, but you've probably seen this on Instagram or Twitter. Um, they make these videos where it's the countdown of the Rumble and it says, "What if?" And then it counts down and then they play somebody's intro. And it's usually, The Rock or it's somebody realistic. There have been a lot I've seen lately that it's MJF. People seem to have, or some people, some fans seem to have it in their mind that MJF is coming to WWE. He's been removed from the AEW roster page online. I maintain that this is all still part of that story. I don't think MJF is going anywhere, at least in the next few years. But he's definitely young enough in his 20s still. I could see a run for him in the WWE, 5 years from now. But I don't think he's showing up at the Royal Rumble. What say you?
I don't think so because the story that they've always told with Max is that he's looking forward to the great bidding war of 2024, which would mean, and there is rumor that his contract was up at the beginning of the year. I don't know. That just seems like a convenient time frame, know. And given all the injuries that he was reportedly dealing with, I don't see him coming back. And if he does show up in WWE, I think it'd be another mistake by Tony Khan, much like Jade Cargill, where you have these champions that go on year-long runs, and then they get beat, and then they're immediately gone from the company. Because to me, MJF needs to come back to finish the story with Adam Cole.
Sure.
Boo boo. I don't know. To me, Undisputed Kingdom is the bathroom break for all shows going forward. But yeah, if you have MJF leave, then the last year of AEW is kind of like, what was the point? Why did you wait until the last minute then to take the title off them when you couldn't get any conclusion to that story?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay,
but I do think MJF will eventually show up in WWE. Now, the question there being is, will WWE let him be MJF?
Right.
Which is always it's kind of like a 50-50 gamble now with guys that they bring in. It's like, are they going to be what we're accustomed to, or are they going to have to come up with something new for WWE? And I think with Triple H being in charge, I think the odds are better that he would be MJF. I just don't know if he'd be allowed to be as let's just say uncensored as MJF,
Yeah. And you're dealing with, TKO and all that as well. Since you brought her name up and we haven't mentioned the women. The Women's Royal Rumble is of course happening as well. Jade Cargill, is now the time to debut her in the Rumble? And do you debut her if she's not going to win it?
Yeah.
I don't think has she wrestled at all on TV for WWE?
No. And the rumor and speculation is, she had not wrestled before joining AEW.
Oh, okay.
And the rumor is that once she got to WWE, they realized how unseasoned she is. Because all of her matches in AEW were pretty much squash matches, save with a handful. Sure. So she has a great look. I think she has a future, in the business in the next 5 years, but I don't know if she's ready to go for for a lengthy match. She was basically the female Goldberg of AEW.
Yeah.
So and they haven't really mentioned her in the last month and a half. So I don't see her showing up. And the first women's Royal Rumble match back in 2018, the women's roster was so shallow that they had to bring in all these
right.
Because I think now the roster is fairly, even if you have to dip into NXT, like you've got 30 credible female wrestlers that can go in there. And I think there are probably better stories to tell with the wrestlers already on the roster than to have to bring in Jade. So I don't see her coming in. It would be a good time to debut her if you have a solid plan in place.
Yeah.
Going forward.
Yeah, because I think that somebody, as much, at least the online hype for her has been, and she's another one of those videos that pops up that, the countdown, and then it's her. I think unless she's going to win it, I don't think I would waste her debut on the Royal Rumble. And I also wonder, like you said, is she ready to wrestle at WrestleMania? Even if it's wrestling, the NXT Women's Champion, or I don't think she's ready to get in there and mix it up with God,
Becky, Bianca, Bayley.
What's the women's champion?
Rhea
Ripley.
Oh, Rhea Ripley. Okay.
I don't think that. So I think I agree with you. I would save her, and get her more reps. And I know that Natalya has come out and said that she's been training with her, and she's doing a great job. Which, she's definitely going to have the right tools at her disposal to get better. So it's just going to be a matter of time, I think, before, like you said, with Max, we'll see Jade in the ring much sooner than that. But it'll be a fun, and that's, like I said, that's the surprise factor. We're doing the Royal Rumble contest, so if you want to get involved with that, it's $5 per entry. You can go to the My123Cents Facebook page and see the official rules. We need more entrants, so if you're listening to this and you haven't enter today, and then share the information and get some more people involved as well. This is also going to be a fundraiser for the My123Cents 2024 action figure wrestling figure drive. So a portion of that $5 will be going toward that as well. Chad,
so, real quick,
oh yeah,
do you have a pick for the women's Rumble?
I really, with Charlotte being injured now, and that's where I kind of worried with Jade getting thrown into it is, again, you get some of these high profile injuries and then you have to rush or change the course. But I'm really hoping, like you said, the women's talent pool is so deep. I don't think you have to. I would almost like to see, even though I'm not a big fan of hers, I would almost like to see Bayley win it, because I feel like they're telling a story with Bayley and the other members of Damage Control. And it's almost like when Batista won it and the whole evolution thing kind of fell apart. So if they're going that way, and I've seen that there has been some speculation that they're going to turn Bayley face. I like her better as a heel, honestly, but yeah, we'll see. What about you?
I was going to say Bayley for the same reason. I think Bayley versus Io, is it Io Shirai?
Io Sky.
Io Sky, yeah. I think that is the story that you're getting to anyway. So having Bayley win and then, saying like, oh, I'm going to challenge Rhea and Io's going to be saved, but then somehow you get to Damage Control maybe kicking Bayley out or talking behind her back and she finds out, and then you have Bayley challenge Io. So to me, that's the logical one. And again, I don't know if Bayley needs to win the Rumble to get to that story, but it seems like the most plausible way to go.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. So let us know your picks for the Royal Rumble as well in the comments, either on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast, and let us know what you think of the show as well. Check out, again, that Royal Rumble contest coming your way. Hard to believe the Rumble is just 6 days away as we're recording this, and 5 days as the show drops. But we are here to talk about Hulk Hogan, Hulkamania. If you're watching, I have busted out my Hulkamania shirt I bought at WrestleMania 4. No, I was not at WrestleMania 4, but my dad and I did go watch it on closed circuit TV at the Kiel Center in St. Louis. And I was 14 years old at the time. No, 15. I had just turned 15. And so I got a souvenir program and the Hulkamania shirt that I bust out for occasions like this. I think I wore it to WrestleMania 25 when we were Hulk Hogan and Rowdy. So explain, because we're going to do 6 cents with this, where we pick our 6 favorite instead of a Mount Rushmore. We do it with 6 because you add up 1, 2, 3 in the My123Cents and you get 6. That's the premise behind why we do it this way. But I kind of like what you have decided, and you're not picking anyone. You're just going to comment on my picks. Is that right?
Yeah, because I think I didn't get into wrestling until mid '84.
Okay.
So Hulkamania was already running wild.
Yeah.
And looking back, I said, okay, let's see who was popular back then. And I looked up the PWI rankings for like November of 83. And I started going down the list and I was like, the problem is hindsight. Like I know what these wrestlers went on to do in the 80s and 90s and some of them today. And so it's like my mind doesn't know how you would book them differently and make it realistic. I just know how we perceive them today. And so I really couldn't come up with six. I mean, I could tell you six guys that you probably think of would be like, oh, okay, let's go with them. But I can see why they probably wouldn't have worked out the way Hogan did.
Yeah,
it has. So instead, I figure I'll just let you list your six because I'm sure we would have had some overlapping people anyway. So this way, I'll just comment on what you have picked and tell you, whether I agree or why I think that they wouldn't have worked out as well as Hulk Hogan.
I think one, you would probably, with the exception of probably two or three, you can probably recite my list. Also, this list is probably 50% 10-year-old Kevin when Hulkamania started and 50% 50-year-old Kevin. It's kind of nostalgically looking back and remembering. Hulk Hogan, my first WWE, WWF, my first wrestling figure, LJN, still have the belt. And let's also say, and I feel dumb even saying this, we know that Hulk Hogan is a polarizing personality these days. We're not endorsing anything he has said or done. We know he wasn't in Metallica. We know that, I know he just recently, though, did save a teenager's life, apparently, after a car accident. So, I was a Hulkamaniac in those early days, for sure. But then my favoritism for him kind of waned a little bit during the Paul Orndorff era. I was disappointed when Hogan won that cage match, but when
he did not win that cage match.
Yeah, when WrestleMania 3 rolled around, Andre was hateable enough that I went back to the Hulkamania side of things. But
Andre won that match too. But real quick, I was going to say it's kind of ironic because my first LJN figure was the Iron Sheik.
Okay,
so I was going to say Hulk Hogan duel.
Yes, Iron Sheik, again, one of those iconic characters in wrestling. Hogan, of course, beats him. He was obviously a transitional champion to go from the Bob Backlund era, which, back in the day, wrestling, Bruno Sammartino, Bob Backlund, WWF was kind of an anomaly in that they had baby faces as champions, whereas the NWA had Ric Flair or Harley Race were heels, and you always had that baby face chasing after them. And, we're seeing it now with Roman Reigns. I think Roman Reigns is, I know, he's the longest reigning heel champion in WWE history for sure. And it's a different formula from what worked seemingly for the WWF back in the day. And obviously it proved to be successful. They were just building up these giant heels to take on Hulkamania. And I don't know that anybody on my list would have been better. We're just saying if Hulk Hogan never existed, if Vern Gagne hadn't, or whomever discovered him and trained him and got him going, if Terry Bollea never set foot in a ring as Hulk Hogan, who would have been some viable contenders? Because I don't think without him and the marketing genius of Vince McMahon coming together that it would have exploded the way that it did, because we saw Hulk Hogan in action figure form. We saw him on lunchboxes, on cartoons on Saturday mornings, the vitamins. He was literally everywhere. And my friends who weren't wrestling fans, kind of casual wrestling fans, they all knew who Hulk Hogan was because he was on Sports Illustrated. He was on the A-Team. He was on Saturday Night Live. He was a pop culture. He was a part of the 80s, and no one else, I don't think anyone else, with maybe the exception of Andre the Giant back in that era, was as recognizable as Hulk Hogan was. So, and I know you were not a big Hulkamaniac, is that right?
No, I said, let me start that sentence over. When Roddy Piper showed up in WCW, he hit the nail on the head when he said, the only reason people cheered you is because they hated me. And I watched WrestleMania 1 live as a 10-year-old, and I was cheering for Hogan at that time because I hated Roddy Piper. But after that match, as I said earlier, I will stand by the referee made a 3 count at WrestleMania 3. Andre the Giant should have been the champion. But we got some NFL officiating, I guess, in that match. WrestleMania 5, I was cheering for Macho Man. I never really liked Hogan. I don't know why, it had nothing to do with the reasons why people don't like Hogan today. There was something about Hogan that I never got into. And when he joined the NWO, well, first when he came to WCW and immediately beat Ric Flair for the title, I was like, why? Right. That's Flair country. And I was a bigger WCW fan than WWF.
Right.
And then when he joined the NWO, I thought it was a good move. And he was kind of liked by proxy, by proximity, by being in the NWO. I was like, okay, I'll take Hogan, I guess. But then, our last Monday Night Raw in St. Louis that we went to, we dressed as the three faces of Hogan, the orange and gold NWO and Mr. America. When I met Hogan, I showed him that picture. He seemed impressed. So I'll take that as just, a good time. But not a Hulkamaniac. I do not have a Hulkamania shirt. I do not have any Hulkamania merchandise other than the picture that I have of Hulk Hogan and myself. All right. And Brooke Hogan. So yes. I think there's your winner. There's your surprise entrant for the Women's Rumble.
Brooke Hogan?
Yes.
So my number 6 is someone that went on to gain was someone that was very hot in the early 80s, the late 70s, early 80s. I don't know that he would have been able to carry the nationwide banner. He did not have the necessary look maybe that Vince McMahon was going for, but that is Jerry the King Lawler. He was a perennial babyface in Memphis, was over like Rover. I can remember watching one of the syndicated shows that we watched as kids. It might have been Central States. I'm not sure what else it could have been at that time. They would show clips of sometimes with Jerry that involved Jerry Lawler. We did not get Memphis wrestling in the St. Louis area. I know it was very popular, obviously, in like Tennessee and Kentucky and southern Indiana, but we did not see it where we were. But I knew enough about him from the aftermags and from seeing about him and hearing about him. I don't think that, though, he would have had that nationwide appeal. He was very regionally appealing, and I think that maybe could have worked, but I don't think the King gimmick. I always thought, like with the King of the Ring, a King was always better played by a heel character. Macho King, King Booker, King Tonga, or King Haku. I feel like those were better than like King Hacksaw Duggan, although King Duggan was pretty fun. But Lawler's run in the WWF as a wrestler, for the most part, was as a heel when he did wrestle. So, what do you think of Jerry Lawler?
Yeah, he's another one that, I really didn't know much. I knew the name, but I didn't know much about him until he showed up in WWF because, again, didn't see Memphis wrestling either. I remember, I think it was 60 Minutes did a story on him that I remember seeing, like maybe in the late 80s. And this is another one that with, what I know about Jerry Lawler now and how his WWE run went.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I don't think he would have had the overall nationwide appeal. I think he was very much a regional Southern wrestling style, and, but you go like, okay, maybe if you brought him in though, would that have highlighted the Andy Kaufman?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, when did Andy Kaufman died in 1983, 84?
Yeah, somewhere in that time frame.
So he would not have been around for like a WrestleMania promotion thing to do anything. And I don't know. It would be interesting because maybe if Lawler would have came in the early 80s into WWF, like his character would have been different. He wouldn't have been the puppy screaming horn dog. Although, again, you take Hogan's personal life, you take Lawler's personal issues. Don't know if that's a good thing. But, right. I think, because Vince wanted to expand globally, I don't think Lawler would have had the same impact.
And I'm going to also mention this just because a lot of times wrestling fans are fixated on ages. Hulk Hogan was 30 in January of '84. So when he won the title the first time, he was 30 years old. Jerry Lawler at this point was 34 years old. My number 5 was 35 years old, and he was already a part of the WWF. He was part of the machine, but he actually left shortly after Hulkamania really got its start and really got going, and that is Sergeant Slaughter. He would eventually come back and win the WWF Championship from the Ultimate Warrior, and again, I think that was kind of a farce, and it was more of a story of convenience than anything else with the Gulf War going on, or the Iraq War, whatever we were calling it that at that time, Desert Storm. But Sergeant Slaughter definitely over, again, like Rover, had a big feud with Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik. I think that Slaughter had been kind of one of those guys that was under the original Vince McMahon and carried over and was part of the new plan. But I think it all came down to the whole G.I. Joe situation. Vince wanted more control over it. And again, I don't know. I'm just kind of going off of memory here. And that's why Sergeant Slaughter left that first time and had a bit of a run in the AWA and wrestled for a bit elsewhere and then came back eventually. But I think at the time, he was a larger than life guy and was popular. He was in pop culture with the G.I. Joe stuff. I just think if they could have worked out a better plan, it may have worked out, as Sergeant Slaughter being the guy that kind of lead the face of the company.
Yeah, that's a name that I did not think about. And so I'm trying to come up with thoughts real quick. But I think any of these names I don't think are going to be on the level of Hulk Hogan. I think Hulk Hogan, like you said earlier, Hulk Hogan plus Vince McMahon was just that perfect storm to capitulate. But looking back, I think because Slaughter was popular in WWF, you mentioned Nikolai and Iron Sheik, but also the matches with Pat Patterson that he had. And because yes, I do believe that the G.I. Joe thing came about when he was not with WWF. And again, I don't know if that was something that came up and that's why he left, or if it was other issues and then he ended up doing it. But G.I. Joe was a very popular cartoon. Rambo was very popular at this time. So you could, with the military gimmick, I think Slaughter at the time was a good talker, and his matches probably, Hulk Hogan is no genius, his work rate is not what got him over. It was the personality. Yeah. So, again, I don't think he would have been as big as Hogan, but I think Slaughter may have been a good viable B choice if it could have been worked out. And because he was not featured on the Hogan Rock and Wrestling cartoon, I don't believe.
No. He left sometime in '84 because he was not a part of the first WrestleMania. He wasn't in any of those cartoons. They technically did not make there is a Sergeant Slaughter big rubber. I don't want to say big rubber guy because that's the new collection by by Matt Cardona and Brian Myers. But there was I think it was actually it was a mail away. And I think it was by Hasbro, but it was the same size as the LJN figures. I never had that one, but so he did have some popularity, but was not featured under the WWF umbrella in that role. So
I think that's a good choice, and I would have wondered what it would have been like had he been with WWF at that time.
Yeah. My number 4, this is 10-year-old Kevin coming up with this one because I did not know the backstory of this guy, but I do know that even at age 41 at the time, he was in phenomenal shape. He was the first WWF. Now, when we get down the list later on, you'll know who I'm talking about, but he was the first WWF superstar that I saw. Flipping through the channels one night, I started watching wrestling very sporadically, but came across, and he jumped over the top rope to land on the Magnificent Morocco and beat the crap out of him, rip his suit off. And that is one Superfly Jimmy Snuka, who had a great feud with Roddy Piper. And again, I didn't know the personal backstory with Snuka at the time. I just know that he was probably, besides Hulk Hogan, the most popular star in that 83, 84, even early 85 era. He probably would have been, and popularity wise, right there with Hogan. But he was 41 years old at the time, so probably past his prime to be carrying the torch and doing the grind of, and let's keep in mind too that these guys, even Hulk Hogan, was making that house show loop back in the day, and they're on the road 275, 300 days a year, maybe a little more, maybe a little less.
Hogan was wrestling 400 days a year thanks to the international dateline.
The media appearances, the extra stuff, the Make-A-Wish stuff. So it is a grind. It's taxing, and I don't know that Snuka, even with knowing his backstory, maybe wouldn't have been the best fit for this. But I think, again, that 10-year-old perspective, I thought Jimmy Snuka would have been good in there, being part of that main event picture.
No, it's funny because Superfly is one of the first wrestlers that I knew about as well. Like friends telling me about him, and I making fun of his name, like Superfly. That's a stupid name. But yeah, I don't, kind of. I think the big thing is that, again, it comes back to mic skills and promo skills, and Superfly never really had that.
Right.
And his feud with Piper was carried by Piper, and so yeah, I don't think Superfly would have been a good media person, a good from an in-ring standpoint. Yeah, he can get the crowd behind him and get some cheers, but I don't think I don't think he had that larger than life persona.
Yeah. My number 3, I think, has the persona, didn't necessarily have the mic skills. At 31 years of age, he would have definitely been a dose of diversity at the top of the card. He was someone that was one of my favorites as a kid. I knew a little bit about him. Actually, I take that back. I think really the WWF was the first time I saw him, and then I learned more about what he had done before that with Mid-South, with Bill Watson and whatnot, and that is the Junkyard Dog. I loved the Hulk, when it was WWF wrestling, Hulk Hogan and Junkyard Dog were my 2 favorites as a kid. At this 10-year-old time, I really thought he was going to win the IC belt from Hammer Valentine at WrestleMania, but there was just something about the dog. And I think, though, as quickly as he kind of rose in the WWF, I feel like he dropped just as quick. And I don't know I don't know what the story is or what happened there with him. We lost him way too soon in life. And I think that he was just someone who really, for me as a fan, again, we're not looking at work rate and stuff, but as a 10-year-old kid, he's bringing the kids in, they're dancing. Yeah, he was on the ice cream bars, and he was on the cartoon, and he was in the action figure realm as well. So he was right up there.
And he was on the album.
Yes, grab them cakes, baby. Yes. And I can remember going and seeing Hulk Hogan and Junkyard Dog wrestle as a tag team in St. Louis back in January, February of 1986, right before WrestleMania 2. So, but I love Junkyard Dog, JYD. So,
yeah, I was a big fan as well, and I think, again, we're looking back on this, and one of the things, both of us are children of the 80s.
Yeah.
I love the 80s. But I kind of look back with rose-colored glasses at that time. One, because I was so young. Wasn't aware of everything that was going on in the world. And now when I go back and watch shows, movies from that time, I see a lot of things that I'm like, ooh, we were doing that back then. Like, I thought that was like, ancient history in terms of, life. And I think one of the issues with JYD is the racial component. And I think, yes, you'd had Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas in WWF, but you look back, most of the foreigners were the evil foreigners, Mr. Fuji, Sheik, Volkov. And I think with JYD, because of that racial animosity still going on, I don't know if Vince would have taken the chance to push him to the top. And that's unfortunate. And, I do agree with you that JYD, I know if you read online reviews of older shows, a lot of these critics will take JYD to task for not being a good worker. But again, at the time, it wasn't about work rate. It was about, can you capture the crowd? And JYD did that. And I think JYD should have been bigger than he was in WWF.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, yeah. I think he would have been a good number 2 or number 3 to push along with, which maybe he was more like 4 or 5 when he was getting pushed. And again, whatever reason he left WWF, because I think he was out by WrestleMania 3. Was he on WrestleMania?
He left after WrestleMania 4.
Oh, after 4. Okay.
He was in the Battle Royal. Yeah, he was in the Battle Royal.
Yeah, and then I know he went to WCW for a short spill, but I think he may have been like a 6-man tag team champion.
Yeah,
at one point. But yeah, JYD definitely had potential to be there, and I think should have been pushed more. But no Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, no Hulk Hogan, and my number 2, I think, is probably the most likely to have been able to do this, to fill in that Hulkamania gap. He was a little older. I didn't realize until the internet came around that he had actually previously wrestled in the WWF before Hulkamania and all that. He was 39 years old at the time. He's the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, baby. I love Dusty Rhodes. I loved his energy, and he did not, as he said, he was not the athlete of the day with his body, and he was, my butt may be a little too big, but man, he had that charisma, and even when he came to the WWF in 1989, I felt like maybe we'll get an IC title run out of him. I knew that, Hulkamania was still kind of running wild, and then the Ultimate Warrior, he was obviously not the body type that Vince was going for at the time. I think if Dusty had either come around a decade later, when we were going for more, like you had Vader and Yokozuna and those kinds of guys, and it wasn't all Ultimate Warriors and Macho Mans and Hulk Hogan's, he might have stood a better chance. But I do think that Dusty could have been that PR guy. He could have been on the road. He could have been going and being on Good Morning America and Saturday Night Live. And, he had the mic skills for sure. He had, again, when we talk about the work rate of all of these guys was not top notch. So he would have fit in fine there. I think the thing that was holding him back would have been his physique, in Vince's eyes, at least.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I think, especially when wrestling was expanding, we've said this multiple times on the show, larger than life. You wanted, I will use the analogy that I've read several years ago about when it comes to music. And it said, like the 80s, you had rock stars. In the 90s till now, you have musicians, because the rock stars were larger than life people that, were just, your David Lee Roths, your Vince Neil's in the 80s, not today. But Dusty Rhodes, if you put Dusty Rhodes on, a poster, or even, like I said, doing a media appearance and say, oh, this guy's a wrestler, most people who are not wrestling fans are going to look at him and be like, yeah, that's, I see that guy at the bar, when I go in for my 2:00 beer. Like, it's not, and obviously there's no argument. Dusty was a great personality. Yeah. And if you gave him the time, and actually he could win, I would say he could win over anybody with promo skills, but yeah, I don't think fans would have bought him, or I shouldn't say fans. I don't think regular people would have bought him as a reason to start watching wrestling if they didn't know who he was. Right.
I agree with that. Someone that I did not put on the list that I felt like by this point, and I didn't even write his age down, but he was older than most of these guys, but just the mobility factor and whatnot would be Andre the Giant. I think that even though Andre was definitely larger than life, you've got the talking ability, with the accent would have been a deterrent. And I think he was a big enough attraction. He was featured the right way maybe wrestled a little too much after he turned heel, and that led to his decline faster than maybe what it should have been. I also considered Tito Santana. He was the Intercontinental Champion twice in this era. Was very popular with fans, going back and looking at the old aftermags and stuff. I always liked Tito, but again, I don't know that he would have been one of those to be the face of the company. Again, a solid third or fourth guy with Junkyard Dog and Jimmy Snuka types. So
now, one name that keeps coming up in my head, and hopefully it's not your number one. I think I probably know who your number one is, but and this guy had been champion in WWF prior. Superstar Billy Graham. Do you think he would have, because he had the body, he had the promo skills, but was it something maybe where we've been there, done that, and now Vince coming in, taking the company for himself instead of his dad running it, he wanted to go in a whole new direction, obviously a new direction because he wants to go global, but do you think he looked at Superstar as the past, even though Superstar did come in later, for a short run?
Right. No, I agree. I think he would have been a good choice, but I think you're right as far as Vincent Kennedy, taking over the company. And one of the first things you do in most cases when you buy a new company is you put the people in that you want in there. And
yeah.
Not that Superstar probably wasn't a draw or wasn't a big part of that. I feel like, I'm trying to remember now, because I know that there was a lot of animosity that Superstar had toward Vince Kennedy for a long time. And then they made amends, and then they didn't, and then they made amends. But I feel like there might have been other factors there that maybe prevented that from moving on when it did. And then by the time he came back in 86 or 87, I feel like he was kind of a shell of his former self. And so I don't know but in 84, when they put the belt on Hogan, was the plan for this to be an unlimited run? I don't know, because he held the belt for 4+ years that first go around. Who knows if that was the original plan or if it just kind of caught fire the way that it did. And it was like, we can't stop this. We've got to keep this going and keep the momentum going. And Hogan obviously could do that, but needed a break, and Hollywood came a-calling and whatnot. I don't know. Billy Graham would have been, obviously, with the verbal skills, the physique, and again, we talked that work rate, but I think bringing him in as a face, because he was a heel for the previous McMahon run. So I think it could have been he could have been a very viable option as well. And just kind of seeing what he would have been able to do, because he influenced Hulk Hogan and Jesse Ventura and Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair and so many others. So what better than to have the original in there kind of running the show too. So I think that he would have been a very good possibility. Even had he been just a few years younger, I think it may have worked even better if he would have been a little younger at that time.
And I mean, like you said, the wrestling business was so different back then because, it wasn't until 85 when we first got WrestleMania. And then 87 when Survivor Series debuted. So, it wasn't like you needed a champion to be on TV every week like we do now. And they're wrestling every 30 days to defend the title because that's what the rule book states. And for some reason that has been changed in the last few years. But having Superstar, he wouldn't have to be there every week, is basically what I'm saying, because of the syndicated program only being an hour. You have, Hogan only showed up once every month or two on these shows. And so, and then, I think maybe Superstar to Hogan would have been a better transition than Iron Sheik to Hogan, which was done just to strap that rocket to Hogan and say, okay, this is what we're doing right now. Whereas you could have maybe built Hogan up a little bit more. And maybe that could have been your, WrestleMania 2. Although, without Hogan and Piper, would WrestleMania 1 have been
right?
Things it was, and with Mr. T's involvement and whatnot. So there are so many butterfly effect scenarios where you change one thing, it's, Eric Bischoff is still in charge and running AWA as the biggest company right now. If you change something,
Right. Yeah. Very, very plausible. And my number one, which will come as no surprise to probably 90% of the people that listen or watch this, is someone that 23 years old at the time, eventually went to the WWF, did not obviously have the mic skills, but definitely had the look. And again, we talk about that work rate, but that's Kerry Von Erich. I was a huge, Kerry Von Erich is the guy that kind of got me hooked on wrestling in the first place back in December of '82. And I primarily watched World Class and those other syndicated shows more so than the WWF at the time. In 1984, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, every year they do their year-end awards. I don't know how legit they are as far as fans voting versus the editors kind of influencing the outcomes of those. But 1984, this is the year that Hulkamania started officially. And it's also the year that Kerry won the NWA Heavyweight Championship and only held it for 18 days. He won the magazine's most popular wrestler of the year that year. He was match of the year with Ric Flair. So Hogan was first runner-up in both of those categories. So to me, at least in some fans' eyes, Kerry was bigger than Hulk Hogan, or at least as comparable. But again, I don't think going there and he had, obviously the personal issues. We've seen the Iron Claw movie. We talked about that. So the lifestyle that he was leading, I don't think would been conducive to the schedule. If he felt pressure in Texas wrestling for, his dad in that regional promotion that had a global appeal, imagine being in a global promotion with the pressures that came along with that. So I don't think that he would have been obviously the best choice, but he's my nostalgic choice, and I would have felt I was doing him a disservice if I didn't put him on my list. So Kerry Von Erich would be my number one pick for that. And there was rumors and speculation, and I can remember, actually, I have a WWF magazine from mid-'84 with the Von Erichs in it. They covered Kerry winning the NWA Championship. So I think there's a clip running around somewhere of Vince McMahon doing like an update from the control center, and he talks about the Von Erichs. So at one point they were all talking, at least, but I don't think that even if strapping that proverbial rocket to his back would have helped with the Demons. He was definitely had youth on his side and had the look on his side, but that long-term sustainability, I don't think would have worked out.
Yeah, when I was looking at names, I knew Kerry would probably most likely come up on your list. And I think, and also recency bias of just seeing the Iron Claw movie and seeing, the lifestyle that Kerry led, it's kind of a, if then situation, whereas if he was in WWF, would he have had the same demon, or would life have been a little bit different because whatever reason? I also wonder, I know, based on the movie, that Fritz really wanted the world champion and championship to be in the family. And if Kerry had gone to WWF earlier than he did, how would that have affected World Class? And would Fritz have wanted some type of, collaboration or agreement with Vince McMahon to send Kerry back down to World Class for, some shows or co-promote shows, because I don't think that one is just a simple, Kerry goes to WWF.
Right.
Situation. There's things, but I've watched a little World Class recently after watching Iron Claw, and I would say out of the three, the three brothers, Kevin, David, and Kerry seems to be the most charismatic. That's the word I'm trying to spit out. But again, he, as we said, he's no Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan just has that thing. But I think if Kerry would have came into WWF sooner, I think he would have been a bigger deal than he ended up being. And also, this is all speculation, but is it the pettiness of Vince, where when Kerry came in, it was maybe later than he wanted, maybe he wanted a younger, healthier Kerry, or was it something to, I'm going to take him just to piss off Fritz, who knows why, or is it just the demons that Kerry was dealing with that sabotaged his own career?
Yeah. So yeah. Anything else about Hulkamania you want to mention? Friends, we want to also hear your list or your thoughts on this list and who we talked about, some of the names, if there's someone we're missing. Who would have you put in that role of Hulk Hogan back in January? Well, December of '83, he comes to the WWF, but January of '84 wins the belt and is off to the races running, which coincidentally enough, Hulkamania starts on my 123 Cents Day, 123. So celebrate appropriately. But Chad, anyone else or anything else that you want to mention about this week's episode?
Well, we're recording this, as we have said multiple times, on January 21st. It is the birthday of a guy that I thought might have been on your list, and that is Ivan Putski, the Polish Hammer.
Polish Power.
Polish Power. Yeah. No, I think, again, it's so interesting, and I wish I had Doctor Strange's ability to go back in time and see multiple scenarios of how different situations played out, because if it wasn't Hogan, what would wrestling look like today?
Right.
Or if Vince if he'd bought WWF but kept it regional, what would wrestling look like today? If Tony Khan wasn't a son of a billionaire, what would wrestling look like today? If Twitter didn't exist, what would Tony Khan be doing? Those are my questions.
Yeah, there's plenty to speculate on what could have or should have or might have happened. Yeah. So we want to hear your thoughts, though. Again, check us out. You can follow along on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or X. Also, check out the jitterymonkey.com or follow and subscribe on your favorite podcast feed. Leave a review. Let us know. And again, enter that Royal Rumble contest. Friends, thanks for listening and or watching. Have a great week. Enjoy the Royal Rumble, and we will talk again soon.